All right, so I'm gonna start again. Let's go back and the point I wanted to make in reading the beginning of Revelation 5 was that it's only Jesus. Oh no, I've got feedback. Thanks. All right, so we're back in business. Sorry about that. One of many technical difficulties that we experienced. All right, so I'm gonna start again. Let's go back and the point I wanted to make in reading the beginning of Revelation 5 was that it's only Jesus coming through the computer.
That's what you got to send us this week.
All right, so we're back in business. Sorry about that. One of many technical difficulties that we experienced. All right, so I'm gonna start again. Let's go back and the point I wanted to make in reading the beginning of Revelation 5 was that it's only Jesus coming through the computer. Yeah. All right, so we're back in business. Sorry about that. Okay, can you hear me now, Rick?
I'm sorry, I turned it off.
Okay, I'm not sure. Looks like it. Huh?
You're good.
Oh, okay, good. All right, so hopefully that's it for the technical problems. Welcome, Megan. Good to see you out there. So at any rate, the point I wanted to make here is that when we go through the various judgments that are going to be poured out during the tribulation, that they're being poured out by God himself. He's the one that's doing it. And he's doing it for a couple of reasons. And number one, as we all know, is to deal with unrepentant sin. There's never going to be a point in history when the world is going to be at a point where sin is no longer a factor. Even though he's provided the way, if he's going to ultimately bring about the millennial kingdom and then the eternal state after that, sin has to be dealt with. And right now, as we read in Peter, he's being patient and long-suffering, and but not yet has he started to has the wrath of the actual tribulation started. Which, before we get into this, kind of brings up a question. I was listening to a couple of guys earlier today talking about preparing for what lies ahead. And it comes down to the fact that we're not appointed to go through the wrath. We're not appointed to experience the actual tribulation. We're not part of that. But we don't know how bad things are going to get before the tribulation. I mean, you go back a year and see how things were then and where we are today. If the Lord doesn't take us out soon, what's it going to be like a year from now? So I think it's an issue that we all have to think about. I know certain people are getting prepared for whatever might lie ahead by having some foodstuffs available. And I don't like this idea of prepping, but it's probably not a bad idea. We really haven't done much, but I think it's something that we're going to be thinking about. Just be prepared for a few months should things go south before the rapture occurs. But again, when we get into chapter 6 and beyond, that's not what we're going to be a part of. But what's leading up to it and the persecutions, I mean, Jesus said that we would be persecuted and go through trials and tribulations. So I'm not making any recommendations, but it's something we all should think about. I know there's places like Patriot Food Supply, and there's other things we can do. I'm sure if you go to the internet, there's suggestions on what to buy, and I know that you guys have bought flour and beans and who knows what else, but those are the types of things. Just food for thought. Chapter 6. I watched as the Lamb opened the first of 7 seals. Then one of the 4 living creatures, saying a voice like thunder, "Come." I looked, and there before me was the white horse. And we've read this a number of times, but this is the first horse, the first of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse that comes on the scene. The white horse has a rider who is carrying a bow but no arrows. And so this is a clear representation of the Antichrist coming on the scene. very early, but without any weapons. And I think what it connotes, and what many people seem to think, is that he is going to conquer uh, just by threats, by being who he is, and so on and so forth. And I think that there's other things happening today that could lead to a time when the world will just be ready to line up behind him. But there is coming a time when there will be war. And in verse 3, we read, "When the Lamb opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, 'Come.' Then another horse came out, a fiery red one. Its rider was given power to take peace from the earth and to make people kill each other. This was given to him was given a large sword." So this implicates or represents war or various battles that will be taking place around the world shortly after Antichrist takes place. Could be regional wars. I don't think it necessarily means a major world war, but it could be. And then in verse 5, the land opened the third seal. I heard the third living creature say, "Come." I looked, and there before me was a black horse. Its rider was holding a pair of scales in his hand. Then I heard what sounded like a voice among the four living creatures saying, "2 pounds of wheat for a day's wages, and 6 pounds of barley for a day's wages, and do not damage the oil and the wine." This is a clear prophecy about rampant famine caused probably by hyperinflation when the tribulation first starts. And we've talked about this one again a number of times, but 2 pounds of wheat for a day's wages and 6 pounds of barley for a day's wages. So what that represents is simply having enough money for the average person to buy one meal per day. And that's really what that represents. But do not damage the oil and the wine. And so that represents the fact that there will be an elite group of people that will be taken care of that will not have to worry about hyperinflation. If you think about the number of billionaires that are out there today, many of whom, not all of them, many of whom are part of the elite that are moving toward this one world system, they're probably going to be okay, at least for a while. But eventually the world's going to come crashing down on them as well. And then the Lamb opened the fourth seal. I heard the voice of the four living creatures say, "Come." I looked, there before me was a pale horse. Its rider was named Death, and Hades followed close behind him. They were given power over a fourth of the earth to kill by sword, famine, plague, and by the wild beasts of the earth. And so what this represents is the fact that 25% of the world's population will be killed or died very early in the tribulation from war and famine and activities by the Antichrist. So if you think about the fact that there's roughly 8 billion people in the world today, that's what 2 billion people that will be killed or will die of starvation or whatever in the early stages of the tribulation, and then it kind of only goes downhill after that. So this is the one reason why many of the people that I listen to, I think particularly the Black Horse, is why it appears as though this is just on the horizon. The coming of the people can hear the hoofbeats of the four horsemen, because we're seeing so much activity that leads us to believe that famine, food shortages, all those things are becoming a very, very serious problem throughout the world. So what sounds do we hear today that point to the nearness of the Lord opening the sealed judgments of Revelation 6? And he talks about Revelation 6, 1 through 2, the white horse. And the author says, many believe these verses refer to the Antichrist bringing the world together under his rule. The absence of an arrow in the bow points to the absence of force, although he will gather an impressive arsenal of weapons during his campaign. And then for all of us, just as a reminder, Thessalonians 2, 1 through 8 assures us that the rapture will happen before the man of lawlessness is revealed. And so this is clearly the beginning of the tribulation. What we're I don't want to say concerned about, but what we're looking at now is the lead up to Revelation, the sealed judgments being opened. And what we could see as that's happening, we're seeing an awful lot unfold. We already see the formation of this coming New World Order. We've talked a lot about the World Economic Forum and the United Nations and so forth. Without firing a shot, think about that, they've gained the allegiance of most leaders for their Marxist plans to enslave the people of the world. And you think about the corporate leaders and the government leaders, and as we've said before, it's going to be an effort put forth by not only government, but the enforcers are going to have to be the major corporations. Just like we saw during the lockdowns, where it was corporations that really refused, under the direction, I guess, of the government to allow people back to work, and then having the authority to say that if you're not vaccinated or whatever, that you can't come back to work. That's since slowed down a lot and is not the issue that it once was, but it's the type of thing that, as it says here, the Marxist plans to enslave the people of the world. The globalists no longer hide their intentions. President Biden recently asserted his allegiance to the New World Order. Klaus Schwab, the head of the World Economic Forum, recently asked 2,600 delegates to his annual meeting in Davos, Switzerland, to work aggressively to bring out the communistic totalitarian agenda advocated by him as well as those in attendance. He opened the meeting by saying, and I read this before, but the future is not just happening. The future is built by us, the elites. That's just the classic definition of socialism, which ultimately must lead to communism. The future is built by us, by a powerful community as you here in this room. So the 2,600 delegates attend the meeting in Davos. Those are the ones that the head of the World Economic Forum and others believe should be the ones in power. Now, that's the thing about socialists. Even though it's never worked, those that advocate at any given time think it's never worked because we weren't leading it. We'll make it work because we're smarter than all those that came before us. But it won't. We all know that. But by the same token, we know that God's allowing this to happen. This is all leading up to what we read about in Revelation 6. In other words, the globalists believe they have the means to reshape the world according to their agenda via the influence they have gained over the global leaders of our day. Can you hear the sound of the first horse getting ready to ride? Another horse, fiery red, went out, and it was granted to the one who sat on it to take peace from the earth. And this fellow, the author says, I'm old enough to remember the Cuban Missile Crisis. Does anybody remember that? Yeah. We all remember. Those of us who were around, that was a scary, scary time. In the early 60s, I did not fully understand what was happening at the time, but I sensed the fear. At school, we had drills in which we hide under our desks as if that would help in a nuclear conflict. I believe the threat today is at least equal to that time, if not far greater. But the mainstream media is diverting our attention away from the current and present dangers to matters such as Pride Month in the January 6 hearings. All this stuff is just a diversion. We're not getting the full story from the mainstream media. Those who are truly awake today clearly see looming threats to world peace. Russia repeatedly warns the West and the U.S. of a nuclear attack if they keep supporting Ukraine. However, the Biden administration seems to be doing all it can to provoke Putin into just such an attack, whether or not that's accurate or not. I mean, there are those that believe that that's happening, but that, certain things are just almost impossible to imagine, and that's one of them. Iran is on the brink of developing its first nuclear weapon. And I just heard today, I think it was, I forget where I heard it, but that they're at the next stage in enriching the uranium. The enrichment process goes through various steps, and they're now at the last step, which will bring them to 90% enrichment, which they already have enough to create a kind of a Hiroshima type bomb, but they're very close to being able to create a nuclear bomb that would be absolutely devastating. China appears intent on attacking Taiwan and is threatening all-out war against anyone who interferes. President Biden says he will defend Taiwan, which would mean a war with China. And we do have, I don't think it's I think it's more or less a gentleman's agreement with Taiwan that if they're attacked by China, that we will come to their aid. We'll have to see. North Korea stepped up its testing of missiles. We know more about that. We put all these threats together with the words of Revelation 6:8 that tell us war will play a part in killing a fourth of the world's population. It seems likely that perhaps one or more of these threats will happen. And then the economic devastation, Revelation 6:5-6. If you think the world is not on the brink of conditions described in these verses, you're not paying attention. We are frightfully close. In the U.S., the reported inflation rate for May was 8.6%, which is the highest in 40 years. For most people, however, the cost of living is accelerating much, much faster than that. President Biden recently assured us that this high rate of inflation in the U.S. will continue for the foreseeable future. The voices warning of devastating world food shortages by the end of 2022 are far too many to ignore. Goya Foods CEO Bob Unani recently, and I think I may have mispronounced that name, recently told Fox News that the world is on the brink of a food crisis. We're on the precipice of a global food crisis, he told Maria Bartiromo. Rockefeller Foundation President Rajiv Shah described what is soon to unfold as massive, immediate food crisis that will strike the entire world, leaving no country untouched. I've lost count of how many food processing plants that have gone up in flames during the past 12 months. And then the question,
100.
100?
100 farms.
I have an email.
You wonder, I mean, some of it, I mean, I think there were a couple of plane crashes and things like that, so it doesn't seem like it's orchestrated, but by the same token, there's been so many that you wonder what possibly could be driving
Bragg
it.
had mentioned it about 4 weeks ago, 3-4 weeks ago. At that time, there was 20,
Yeah,
and that was only a
right,
month ago.
yeah,
Yeah, those are food processing plants.
Yeah,
right,
and before that,
And the likelihood
in the
of,
last 10 years,
the
two.
likelihood of one is very rare.
right,
To be that many in a few months is
Yeah,
unheard of.
because you said before that, even 10 years before that, there was like 2
Yeah.
in 10
And I
years.
think Mark's talked about additional kind of food,
Yeah, you have the Walmart distribution center.
Yeah.
Farms,
yeah,
Smithfields.
there's so much.
There's something going on.
The result of all these approaching horrors will be a death count higher than anything the world has seen since the Genesis 6 flood. Well, how do we know that? Because that's exactly what the Bible says. Revelation 6:7-8 describes what the world will experience when Jesus opens the fourth seal. Right now, 1/4 of the world's population would be almost 2 billion people, and that's just at the beginning of the tribulation. It's also easy to see how the coming food crises could kill a vast number of people. Africa would likely suffer the most at first, but as the contrived, I like the way he inserts the word contrived, which means on purpose. Somebody's behind all of this stuff doing it. What we're watching is a controlled demolition of just the entire world system, including our country, supported by people in the current administration, I might add. strongly support it. It also is to see contrived food crisis expands. Western nations will soon see the death toll skyrocket. Those pushing the U.S. Green New Deal and UN's Agenda 2030 warn that we will feel pain as the world transitions away from fossil fuels. This most certainly will include mass starvation, as green energy will not suffice to meet the needs of the world's population. It cannot even come close. So you ask yourself, why are they pushing this? You know, we have enough gas and oil in this country to last 100 years, but they're not. Why? I mean, what's going on? I think it's demonic. I think it's satanic, and I think that it's moving us into that one world system eventually. While it may seem that human actors caused the devastation of the four seals, and I wanted to read Revelation 5, we must remember that God is sovereign over all the affairs of mankind. It's the Lord who opens the seals and allows the destructions to follow. Numerous Old Testament prophets warned of these coming judgments under the heading of the day of the Lord, which is another word for the tribulation, another way of describing the tribulation. The book of Revelation adds details to what God has warned about down through the centuries. There will be a time when God's patience ends, and the words of Psalm 75:8 come to pass. Can somebody look that up and read it to us? You could.
5:8.
75:8. Okay, another article written by Damon Duck.
75 verse 8.
75:8.
In the hand of the Lord is a cup full of foaming wine mixed with spices. He pours it out, and all the wicked of the earth drink it down to its very dregs.
Yeah. Basically what it's saying is that the Lord is the one that's pouring out his wrath. He's the one that's going to do it. That's what the wrath of the Lamb, the wrath of the Lord is. And you know, what we're seeing now again are the horse's hooves that are moving into sight today. Okay, another article. And I'll just go through some of the highlights of this as well. But on June 1, 2022, Anne Graham Lotz, Billy Graham's daughter, wrote, quote, "Our beloved nation is melting down." And here are more reports on things that are taking place. One, concerning shortages. On May 25th, 2022, Bloomberg reported that fuel shortages, drought, and heat waves in Asia, Europe, and the United States could cause rolling blackouts in less than 1 month. Has anybody heard about that threat, rolling blackouts or potential brownouts?
Buy your electric car, are you?
Pardon me?
Gonna buy your electric car now, are you?
Yeah. Number two, concerning food and fuel shortages, on June 2nd, Bill Wilson wrote, quote, "According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, a family of 4 on a thrifty food plan paid $917 for groceries in May, up about 65% from a year ago. Gasoline prices, and we all know this, have jumped over 53%. The American Automobile Association asked on his website, is this the calm before the storm? The answer is a loud yes.
What about the cows dying? You think that was a,
I don't know what that was all about. I don't think anybody really knows.
I mean, they say it's the heat, but it's hot out there all the time.
Yeah, I
No,
know.
it's
It
not
doesn't
the heat.
really
They
make
have been,
sense.
Had organs surgically removed. Very, very specific deaths.
What?
Really?
Yeah,
We're 5,000, right?
yeah.
Somebody
Yeah.
came and took their organs?
So tell
I
us
don't
about
know-
that,
I
John.
don't know anything about this.
It was, on Fox News,
Yeah.
not Fox News, on the, what do you call the streaming service that they have, Fox Nation?
Fox Nation. yeah.
Fox Nation. Tucker Carlson's done a thing on UFOs.
Yeah.
And one piece of that goes into that they found farmers all over the world, but not the least of which here in the US have found lots and lots and lots of dead cows on their property. And when they go find them, there's no evidence of what did it. how it was done, who did it, and there's no value in it. In other words, it isn't like the meat was taken, or, you know, if something was stolen, in most cases, something had been surgically removed, like an organ, an eyes, or a liver, or various body parts. So, I don't know, nobody knows. There doesn't seem to be any evidence as to
Interesting.
how it's happened. But
Well, let's not get caught up on the idea that it could be UFOs. I don't believe that, but who knows? There are no UFOs. They're demonic. I mean, there's no such thing as I mean, there may be, people see things, but they see things that just absolutely defy the laws of physics.
Right.
Now, those that believe in UFOs will say, well, they come from an advanced civilization. The laws of physics are the laws of physics. I don't care where you come from. So that's just another thing. I mean, remember that we read in 2 Thessalonians as well as in Revelation, there'll be signs and wonders. And to say, not this, the least of which is to say that who knows what these things could be used to explain when the church disappears. So, not to get worried about that, but just one more sign, one more thing
For
that's
what it's
taking
worth,
place.
they're making a point now not to call them UFOs because they don't know what it is.
Right.
Whether it's aliens or whether it's some foreign power like Russia or China or what it is. But I think your explanation of some demonic power is better than most, certainly as good as any
Correct.
explanation as to what it could
Yeah.
be.
I'm not surprised that we're seeing more of that now. Okay, on June 3rd, Mike Adams predicted that food shortages in the U.S. will lead to food riots, resulting in martial law before the midterm election. Now, that's a pretty bold prediction.
Gives the hope.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we'll just have to wait and see on that. June 6th, President Biden declared a national emergency for the next 24 months unless it's canceled first. Biden said multiple factors are threatening the ability of the United States to provide sufficient electricity generation to serve expected customer demand. Two multiple factors listed in his declaration are Russia and climate change. No talk about shutting down Keystone or limiting drilling or anything like that.
Couldn't be them.
And this is Damon's opinion. He says, my opinion, America's energy crisis is not being caused by Russia or climate change. America is deliberately being weakened from within. We can take that as a possibility, as true, as false, whatever we want. But I think that possibility is there. This is part of the World Economic Forum Great Reset, a transition from the old normal to the new world order by 2030 or sooner. It's one of many scare tactics. So, we'll see. And then he goes on to say, I believe Americans will soon be told, quote, that we can't solve our own problems by ourselves. And that's consistent with what Jesus said, that as we get closer to the end of the age, there'll be a distress of nations. Remember that? I think it's in Luke 21. Maybe it's in that and Matthew 24. But what that simply means is the problems are going to become insurmountable, that mankind is not going to be able to answer the problems, to solve the problems. And if you think about just a lack of leadership on the global scene today, there are no Maggie Thatchers, there's no Ronald Reagans, there's no whatever that are out there leading the world with the answers. There's no Churchills. Although it does sound as though Netanyahu may be coming back if he can win this crazy trial he's going through, because the Israeli government has once again collapsed. And so Bennett, who is a very weak leader, is no longer prime minister. Lapid, who will be kind of an interim prime minister, and then ultimately they'll have elections with the idea or possibility that not Netanyahu could come back. It's a possibility. So we'll have to wait and see. We can't solve our own problems by ourselves, exactly what Jesus says. That our problems, the inflation, supply chain crisis, pandemic, are global, and they require a global solution, a world government. So think about all these crises that are happening, and leaders ultimately get to the point where they say, we don't know what to do. But we think the answer is to bring us all under one nice global system. And that's just kind of the strategy that will be used. Concerning world government, on June 2nd, it was reported that Wayne Allen Root, a radio, I've never heard of him, host, writer, and Libertarian Party candidate for president in 2008, said he believes the U.S. economy is being destroyed fast that the U.S. will not make it, so fast that the U.S. will not make it to the 2024 elections. And he's not even sure the U.S. will make it to this November's midterm elections. So there's a lot of people out there I've heard saying, again, nobody knows the day or the hour or what's going to happen, but many are saying very unlikely that we're going to make it to 2024 as the superpower we currently are. We're declining so rapidly, both from a moral perspective. I think God's pulling his hand, and I think that's the big thing, his hand of protection's being lifted from us, which is why we're seeing all these crazy things about defunding the police, which leads to spikes in murder and who knows what else. My opinion, if the U.S. economy is destroyed before 2024, the global economy will go down with it. My opinion, I've also long believed that the rider on the black horse in Revelation 6 is hyperinflation and a global economic collapse, and the rider will be released by Jesus early in the tribulation period. Remember, he's the one that opens the seals. Right now, he's holding him back. And if you think about what's holding him back is the restrainer. We're what's holding him back. It's the Holy Spirit that's holding him back. Jesus and the Holy God, the Holy Spirit, are holding back the four horsemen. But man, it's kind of like they're getting anxious to leave the gate, to leave the corral, and get out there and finalize what they think they're going to do. I agree with those that believe the people in Washington are too intelligent to get America into this mess, so it must be deliberate. We can draw our own conclusions on that, but I think there's a lot to be said to that. Concerning world government, on June 6th, I don't know if anybody heard about this, but Mexico's President Obrador suggested the United States and Mexico should erase their border and merge the two nations. And in case that sounds ridiculous, he announced that he will meet with President Biden at the White House next month, and Biden's just liable to say, yeah, let's do it, next month. It seems incredible that any president of the United States would even discuss a merger with Mexico, but then Biden stopped construction on the border wall and said he will make the New World Order happen. 6, and this may be something that's difficult for people to hear, but it's been there for a long time, and it deals with, I better not get into it, but it has to do with...
Just tell us.
Yeah, mute that again.
Huh?
Mute that again and then...
All right, here's what it says. I'm quoting this from an article. This is not me speaking, but concerning the COVID-19, and these are facts. Concerning the pandemic, on June 3rd, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control, CDC, released their data on adverse reactions to COVID-19 vaccinations. The U.S. government-funded CDC data shows that in the U.S., you ready for this? 586 million vaccinations were administered. 346 million were Pfizer, 221 were Moderna, 19 million Johnson & Johnson. 825,454 people had an adverse reaction. 13,150 people died. 16% died within 24 hours. 20% died within 48 hours. Have you heard that on the news anywhere? 83,454 people had a serious reaction. Readers should be aware that only a small fraction of adverse reactions get reported to the CDC. In other words, facts are probably much worse. And these numbers are just the United States. Okay, so concerning the days of Noah, wickedness, Jesus said that as the time of his return gets closer, conditions will be as in the days of Noah, which is just evil everywhere. If you remember that it was only Noah and his family, 8 members of his family, got on the ark. Everybody else in the known or in the world at that time perished. They came under God's judgment, a very small percentage, in spite of the fact that Noah warned them for how many years while he was building the ark? It was reported that a man with a weapon and burglary tools said he wanted to kill Judge Kavanaugh. So wickedness, absolute wickedness. And we know some of the other things. I don't know if you've heard about Jane's Revenge, that group. That is saying that if Roe versus Wade is overturned, that people better watch out. They're basically saying we'll give you 30 days if you're a pro-life organization to either stop doing what you're doing or change your opinion, and if you don't, we're coming after you. So that's another thing that we really need to be on the watch and praying about, is if Roe versus Wade is overturned, the potential for violence this summer could be very significant. And they're coming after churches. They make no mistake about it. So, in fact, this is the next article, and I'll just read a couple of points from this. Summer of chaos, Homeland warns, this is Homeland Security, warns of mass casualty violence. Will this summer of widespread politically motivated violence in the United States, will this be a summer of politically motivated violence in the United States? The Supreme Court decision that finally overturns Roe versus Wade is expected to be released this month. They're now saying the end of June, first part of July, that will come out. I thought it might come out this week, but there's probably reasons why it didn't. Is expected to be released this month, and authorities are fearing the worst. In fact, the Department of Homeland Security just issued an advisory warning specifically of, quote, this is the Department of Homeland Security, mass casualty violence once the Supreme Court's decision is officially released. There are millions upon millions of Americans that are extremely angry that Roe versus Wade is going to be overturned. So just kind of a lookout there. And talking about this organization I just mentioned, Jane's Revenge. Sadly, attacks are already happening. In fact, on Tuesday, the offices of a pro-life organization in Buffalo was firebombed by a group of abortion terrorists known as Jane's Revenge. That's the name of the organization. A Christian anti-abortion group in a suburb of Buffalo, New York, had their offices firebombed and vandalized in what the company CEO called pro-abortion Christenstalt. And Christenstalt is a reference to the Night of Broken Glass that happened just before the Holocaust in I think around 1930. Similar attacks were carried out in Washington on June 3rd and Madison, Wisconsin on May 8th. Once the Supreme Court officially overturns Roe versus Wade, there will undoubtedly be even more firebombings. Then the threat of assassinations. I mean, I wouldn't want to be a Supreme Court justice. I mean, it's just tragic that it would get to that point. But they're going to potentially be in peril, and they're going to need an awful lot of security. So, kind of an overview or just some highlights from what we saw. So, going into the summer, I just made a list of things that I'm going to be looking for, that I'm going to be paying attention to, both through James Cadiz and Tom Hughes and all the ones that we listen to, Amir, and just the news in general. And number one has to do with Russia. Let's just open our Bibles quick to Ezekiel 38. This is one that we've looked at a million times, but it's so significant because things are just coming together and being set up for this event to take place. And what I want to point out again is just like we saw with in Revelation 5 that it's Jesus that will open the 6 seals, we need to understand that this confederacy of nations that'll be headed or led by Gog, the leader of Russia, and Russia is not going to lose this war in Ukraine. It's just not biblically in the cards for them to do so. Are they going to suffer some difficulty? Yeah, but they're going to win. They're going to destroy and come out. They're not going to be defeated to the point where they're no longer power. It's just not going to happen. So the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, set your face against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshach and Tubal prophesied against them, and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I am against you, Gog. So what we have is this leader of Russia, who is depicted here as Gog. God Almighty has something against him. And why does he have something against him? Because he's a communist. He doesn't believe in God. He hasn't trusted God. He's an evil person. Then here, this is the key to what I wanted to talk about. I, God, will turn you around, put hooks in your jaws, and bring you with your whole army, your horses, horsemen, fully armed, and a great horde with large and small shields, all of them brandishing their swords. And so we all know the story of what's going to happen, what Ezekiel 38:39 is all about. But when it comes time for this confederacy to move on Israel, because God's got a plan, God is going to reveal his power and his commitment to Israel by the way he suddenly will defeat this confederacy. When 5/6 of their military will be defeated, be killed as hailstorms and earthquakes and them going against each other, shooting each other and so forth takes place, because God's going to do it. And with that, he's going to reveal who he is to Israel and to the rest of the world. People are going to say, whoa, how did that happen? But it's God that's orchestrating this event. And so when we see Russia making the move, Russia in Syria, Turkey now saying that they're going to go in and they're going to mount a pretty major military advance in northern Syria, so that their presence is even greater with Iran, and all these things happen. It's God that's orchestrating this major event that's about to take place. So, what do we know? Russia is becoming increasingly assertive over certain aspects of Israel. Increasing border issues. For example, the western border of Syria, north of central Israel, is Russia's sovereign territory. That's what they say. It's their sovereign territory. And then Putin, through a spokesman, was making noise about the Golan Heights. I think we talked about that maybe a month or so ago, where Russia officially said that Israel does not have the authority to control the Golan Heights, which they absolutely have to. So Russia is beginning to put Israel into a very difficult situation. They requires that Israel gain their permission to attack Iran outposts and so forth in Syria. That's over Syrian airspace, which Russia has basically claimed for themselves. Ezekiel 38 seems to indicate that Russia and Israel will have a fairly good relationship, and that's what we're seeing today. You know, Netanyahu and Putin were pretty chummy for a long time, and so what that means is that Israel's going to be pretty much surprised when all this takes place. Russia's not going to lose the Ukrainian war. In fact, did you know this, that the ruble is right now, as we sit here, the strongest currency in the world, in spite of all the sanctions, in spite of what's going on? How do you figure that?
Well, it's
They're
because,
claiming
it's
England.
because they're making,
Huh?
Putin's making them pay for things in rubles.
Right.
after the sanctions went in.
right,
And
Yep.
so that's when it started to.
yeah, right.
And then
I heard
also
today that,
everything in England too, they're questioning now, England's like working with Russia. There's a lot going on behind the scenes.
I heard today that Saudi Arabia, I'm sorry, that China is stopped buying a lot of oil from Saudi Arabia so that they can buy it from Russia.
Okay.
So that's a huge
Yeah,
impact on the
right.
ruble.
Well, what it shows is that, that the NATO and the United States thought that they were gonna be able to bring Russia to its knees, but it's not happening. So, what we have is Iran also, getting close to, having nuclear capabilities, which puts Russia, or Israel in a position where, if Ezekiel 38 isn't fulfilled first, they're gonna have to take some sort of action, and I think relatively soon. Now I read today, just today, that Turkey is threatening incursions into northern Syria to push back Kurdish fighters. And who does the United States back? Kurdish fighters. So all of this is happening in Syria, just north of Israel, which is where this confederacy, as we read through Ezekiel 38, will come from. First time in history since Ezekiel wrote these words some 2,600 years ago. You can't make this stuff up. The only question about Ezekiel 38 is when it happens. I think it happens before the tribulation. Whether it happens before the rapture or not, time will tell.
Can I ask a question or say something? Earlier you mentioned about Russia having a better relationship with Israel, but when you read down in Ezekiel, it talks about that. It says when they put the hooks in the jaw that he's going to go against to a peaceful people who dwell safely without walls, neither having bars nor gates. So that
Right.
tells me Israel's going to be in a very peaceful state
Right.
when there's surprise
Yeah,
attack,
right.
like you just said.
Yeah, and some would say they're not in that state right now with Hezbollah, but they think they are because they're so strong militarily, and so I don't foresee a time in the near future when they'll be in a state of peace and so forth. Now, they're certainly very prosperous, and doing well financially, but I think at least from their mind, and that's where you read in Ezekiel 37:10 that it says that Israel will have a great army, which is what they have now. So,
Which is one of the best in the world, actually.
yeah.
What about the Pope?
The Pope?
Claiming, I was watching this thing on him, that the end is coming, that he will be the last Pope. And, they're saying that he's getting sicker and weaker. And that's when I don't know this, but I think maybe the Antichrist is coming then. Because they're saying that it was even said, it was already predicted that the 121st, or 112th Pope would be the last Pope.
Yeah. I don't know exactly what that means, but
And they said he
Most-
is.
yeah, most people that study prophecy believe that the false prophet that is mentioned in Ezekiel or in Revelation 13 that'll support be the Antichrist's right-hand man will be a pope. Now, that's at least 3.5 years away if the tribulation were to start tomorrow. And so Pope Francis very likely is not the false prophet. And so this idea of him being the last, I don't know where that comes from. But-
I sent you a link on that.
Huh?
I texted you a link on that.
Yeah, oh, this Jimmy Evans thing? Yeah, I just started listening to that today. But it doesn't really matter one way or another. There will be a false prophet. I don't think it'll be Pope Francis because he's too old. The guy is 86 years old. Although it's possible. I mean, anything's possible. But at any rate, the false prophet likely will be whoever the Pope is at the time. There's just a lot of evidence, it seems, to support that.
And another thing, with Putin being as sick as he is.
Putin shit?
Yeah, he's got cancer. And they said at the last meeting that he had, he went into sweats and all that and had to leave. you almost wonder if he's gonna last much longer. You know, and is this the rapture for us and also the end for him too? You know?
Time will
It goes
tell
in
on all that.
What we get may be worse than what we have,
And so let me
We
just,
don't know that, no, I know.
yeah, let me just move on with this. Then number 2 I had was the new elections in Israel. Who knows what that's gonna mean? The hook that we just mentioned, I think it probably, something's gonna motivate Israel or this confederacy to move on Israel. I think it's probably energy. Right now, we've got Israel agreeing to export natural gas through Egypt, which is a proxy for them to move it into Lebanon, Syria, and ultimately into Europe. That conflicts with what is Russia's primary source of income. And so the hook, I think, is somehow going to be tied to energy. And from what I understand, somebody mentioned last week that they can start exporting, Israel can start exporting natural gas relatively soon. So pay attention to that. So that could, I think, who knows what the hook is, but I think it probably could be that, let's put it that way. So there's a lot of wait and see going on right now, but we need to comply with what God says in Psalm 122:6, which is a command. It commands us to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. God tells us to do that. We talked about prepping. I'm not going to go into any more of that. That's an individual thing. Then another thing, watch China. China has now says the Straits of Taiwan is international territory, and I think they've even gone so far as to say it's their territory, which basically is saying, U.S., stay away. You know, we're being warned in no uncertain terms that we need to stay out of that. So we'll see what's going to happen there. Fuel costs and the impact on inflation. You know, there was a fella in Pennsylvania, a farmer in Pennsylvania, saying, I have all this equipment that needs diesel fuel. I can't get it, and even if I could, I can't afford it. And so he can't fill his tractors. Gutierrez, the head or the UN Secretary General, says that funding for fossil fuels is delusional, and warns that it's going to bring about, if we do that, if the world does more, you know, drills the oil and fracks the gas or whatever, that it's going to just contribute to the climate crisis. So there's a major sentiment around the world against any sort of drilling for oil. Now, maybe November comes and things can happen, and you know, maybe things will get better. But we have enough oil and gas in this country, as I said, for 100 years, so it just doesn't make any sense.
Bob, I heard yesterday, I think it was, about coal in the United States. There's enough coal here for electricity for hundreds of years.
Right.
And we burn coal so cleanly now
Right.
that it's almost not even
Right.
an environmental threat. And China also has a lot of coal. And they're building something like one new coal plant a
Right.
month, I think.
Right.
Some crazy.
Well, you know, it's just like, you know, if you think about the World Economic Forum, that the pandemic was just a great opportunity for them, and the next thing that they're going to focus on is climate change. It's a cult. It's a religion, and
an
it's all
excuse.
based on misinformation. It's all lies. You know, that they always have to say that, you know, 12 years from now, if we don't do something, you know, New York's going to collapse. It's going to be underwater.
That was about 7 years ago.
Yeah, you know, and the AOC said something like that a few years ago. So, the economy. I heard this a couple of times, but 60% of all the currency that has ever been printed in the United States has been printed since Biden took office.
Oh, I don't doubt it.
How much
I don't doubt it. Does anyone know
60%.
how much $1 trillion is?
Yeah. And so what that means is that he claims that what he's done has nothing to do with inflation.
Printing money.
But all of this this currency that's been printed is just money chasing after too few goods. And so what it does is it causes inflation. And occurred during this administration. Then again, another thing, the ships still aren't leaving Singapore like they should. So we still have this ongoing issue with supply chain, chips in Taiwan and other places. Yeah, I was listening to, people listen to this one guy we all listen to on the internet, guy by the name of, his title, Monkey Works. And he said his wife bought a diesel truck. And the main compartment that does the nav and all the other stuff in the truck won't work because they don't have a chip. And she's had that truck for 7 months and they don't know when they're gonna get the chip to be able to operate that. One world government. It's gaining momentum. Did anybody hear this? I just heard this today too. Norway is now tracking food purchasing habits. So in other words, and like this person that I read said, watch it come here. It's coming here. If we have food shortages, they're going to track what we purchase, what we eat, what we buy. And it's just like a family of four, and suddenly you get a call or an email or a text that says, you really need to buy all that food? You know, we think you need to cut back. So that's coming.
Yeah, they already do.
Oh, yeah, they know everything about it.
Further decline.
Stop and Shop card. Or
Watch
finance
it. Watching the further decline, destruction of America as we know it. We're watching a controlled demolition of our country as we've known it. And I think most people, and I heard somebody mention this the other day, believe that, you know, we've been through crises before, and we've always come through them, and everything's fine. But my comment or my retort to that is, yeah, that's true, and maybe so, but have we ever seen so many things happening at one time like this, ever?
Oh, this is
Never.
when you did your New World Order class a few weeks ago, the biggest point I took away from that was the convergence of events.
Right.
There's so many
Right.
things happening at
Which is
once.
exactly what
There
Jesus
isn't
said.
an area you could look in that
Yeah.
isn't in
Yep.
destruction right now.
Um,
You can't survive this
That's the
without
key.
God.
But most people still don't believe it.
Right.
Right.
Well, we've,
That's
you know,
the honest thing. There's so much evidence, and most people don't even see it, never mind believe it.
well, Americans aren't used to it.
Yeah.
You know, we've never experienced anything like this.
Well,
We've never
most
heard
people
of
aren't
food
hearing anything
shortages.
about any of this because
Yeah.
the mainstream news that they listen to, you don't hear a peep. All you hear is about what's happening in the next town over.
Or January 6th, insurrection.
Yeah.
Anything.
Potential brownouts, blackouts, especially on the West Coast this summer, as a result of fuel and electrical outages, have been predicted. Violence, we talked about Jane's Revenge. You know, watch out for the Roe versus Wade thing. Food shortages, I talked about this Pennsylvania farmer. And then why are Bill Gates, China, Blackrock, why are they purchasing so much farmland? Bill Gates has purchased like 250,000 acres of prime farmland.
He's the biggest farmland owner in the United States.
And with the idea that they are going to produce things that nobody wants to eat, that are better for us and are good for the environment. So just that type of thing is going on. Next thing is, and we can get into this when we get back, but is the left, are the Marxists, are they planning something that could possibly interfere with the November elections? Yeah. And if so, what could it be? You know, who knows?
Anyone watch
And then one of the big questions, I thought this was interesting, but a couple of weeks ago, John kind of summarized Eye for Eye, the book that Bill Koenig wrote. And I get his newsletter every week, and today I was reading it. And he says that he thinks he knows who's behind this whole Biden administration. He thinks it's Susan Rice. That she's up to her eyeballs in abortion and economic issues and international issues. She was essentially Obama's right-hand person, and that she wields a lot of power. And she's the one that came out after Benghazi and explained that it was because of what was it, a YouTube thing or something that was an insult against Muhammad or something that caused that. So she's basically, he thinks, running the country. Not that that means anything, but Biden trusts her more than anyone. And it also says that when the time comes, and I think it'll come before the end of his term, somebody's going to have to say, Joe, you got to go away. I think we're getting to that
Still,
point.
he's not
We
gonna
just
make
can't.
it more than 2 more years.
Yeah, I just don't see it happening.
To Biden.
The Great Reset. Remember, it's not possible without a partnership between government and corporations. Blackrock, for example, we talked a lot about Blackrock, and Larry Fink, the head of BlackRock, is a World Economic Partner, the world's largest asset manager. Fink stated, quote, "I believe that the pandemic has presented such an existential crisis, such a stark reminder of our fragility, that it has driven us to confront the global threat of climate change more forcefully and to consider how, like the pandemic, it will alter our lives." And so it's just amazing how he takes and jumps from the pandemic to climate change. I don't see the connection, but what he's saying is the pandemic proved how vulnerable we are, how fragile we are, and so we really need to step it up when it comes to climate change. And when we had our Thursday night meeting a month or so ago, we talked a little bit about the environmental sustainability, government ESG, compliance, compliances that governments or that corporations are supposed to initiate, make sure that their carbon footprint is the right size, and all of the other things, all of the other woke things are taking place. That chicken is starting to come home to roost, and it is causing costs to corporations to spike. And Larry Fink basically said, if you don't comply, you're not a member, or you're not a member of the club. And he's really come out, and so this ESG thing has really taken on a life of its own. Michael Rechtenwald, who is the Chief Academic Officer for American Scholars, stated, "Big digital is the communications, ideological, and technological arm of an emerging corporate socialist totalitarianism. The Great Reset is the name that it has since been given to the project of establishing this world system. Just as Schwab, the World Economic Forum, predicted, COVID crisis has accelerated the Great Reset. Monopolistic corporations have consolidated their grip on the economy." We don't see that. We don't hear about it, but that's what's going on. Is that, I mean, you go to any major corporation today, and they all have their diversity programs. They all have their environmental programs. I mean, how does an insurance company, a major insurance company, impact the environment? But yet, part of the plan, which costs them millions of dollars, is that they have to do something to make sure their, quote, carbon footprint is where it needs to be. Socialism continues to advance for the rest of us. In partnership with big digital, big pharma, the mainstream media, national, international health agencies, and corporate populations previously and compliant populations, which previously were Western states, think especially of places like what another thing that's happened is Australia, New Zealand, Austria are being transformed into totalitarian regimes modeled after China. So, all of this stuff that's just part and parcel to everything that's going on. What happened in Australia with basically the totalitarian approach that they took to their population during the pandemic was, by a lot of people thought, clearly intended. And the author of this article says, "I say that okay, the author says when it talks about totalitarianism and everything, he says, I say it has landed and lodged here in the United States. And what evidence do we see of that? We see this, what's that group that, the Truth Organization or the Truth Group and the censoring and all the things, the cancel culture, the wokeism, all the stuff, it's coming and it's only gonna get worse. So before we conclude, I wanna just go to 1 Corinthians, which I thought was a pretty apt conclusion. 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verse 13. This is a message, I think, for us, for believers, during what's going to be or could be some pretty difficult times. And if we're standing strong for Christ, which we're being called to do, it could come with a price. I'm not saying anything really bad's going to happen because, again, we're not appointed to suffer wrath. But Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians 16:13, be on your guard, stand firm in the faith, be courageous, be strong. And he goes on to say, do everything in love. And so that's the message. We need to be on our guard, stand firm in the faith, be courageous, be strong. And I think it's up to each of us to try to figure out in our own minds what that means, you know. And I don't think we can back down. You know, as it says in Romans 13, I think it is, or wherever, that when man's law conflicts with God's law, we have to stand on God's law, God's principles. And that could be tough. You know, we could be canceled very quickly, you know, and but that's the price we pay. Jesus said, they will hate you because they hated me. And so we're at a pivotal point, I think. I don't know what other people think, if anybody agrees with that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. And that's what it's about. It's about Jesus Christ coming back, the Redeemer. And I think I mentioned that I'm trying to put together and start this podcast, which is kind of a comedy of errors right now. But one of the things that that I say in there is, you know, at no time can I ever remember a time in history, or at least in my life, or in reading whatever history book I've ever read, as we talked about, John, is this convergence, so much happening at the same time. What else could it possibly be? Is it just coincidence? I would say maybe, but for the fact that so much of what we're seeing lines up with Scripture. You know? The World Economic Forum, Revelation 13, Ezekiel, Russia, Ezekiel 38, the food shortages, inflation, Revelation 6, you know, and you can go on and on and on. You know, it's just, it's not like, you know, energy crises, you know, a lack of any kind of decent leadership anywhere, just setting the stage for Antichrist to come on the scene. You know, he's going to come out of nowhere. He's going to come on the scene and he's going to say, hey, I've got the answer. He's going to be very charismatic. The world's going to fall in love with him and line up with him. And the people will literally think he is the Messiah. But yeah, he is going to make Adolf Hitler and Stalin and Mao and all of those other notorious world evil leaders look like choir boys. People have no idea. But Patty,
What?
We will not know who he is.
Thank you, Jesus. I got it.
You there?
Oh, way there. So far there, there's no turning back.
I can just add one last comment. I think we all need to remain strong this summer.
Right.
When we're not coming here every
Yeah.
week. For all that I think I know about the convergence and these events that are happening, I find that this Tuesday class it's like that jolt of reminder.
Keeps you
You wouldn't
grounded.
think I
Right.
would forget, and I don't forget, but as the week goes on, and it's kind of like,
Life
you
takes
know,
over.
just before the flood, when people were marrying and doing life as normal, that's what it feels like. I mean, in Connecticut, maybe not every city in the United States, but around us here, it feels like it's just normal life.
Yeah.
And when Tuesday comes around, it's like, that's that reminder, oh yeah, it ain't so good.
Right.
It's not
And
normal.
we need to remember that
Right.
throughout the summer, just because we're not coming from Tuesday night
One thing we
class.
haven't talked about is the stock market, down 20%. Trillions and trillions of dollars. Yeah, trillions of dollars have been lost out of 401k accounts and savings. Who knows? It's,
They don't know where it's gonna stop.
no,
They literally don't know where it's gonna
no,
stop. I mean,
no.
probably got a little bit of a bounce going on right now, but within the next month, by the end of July, hold on to your hat.
Wow.
It's going to be horrible.
Why would it be any different? You can't get supplies, they can't deliver any goods,
Exactly.
fuel is tremendously
We
high.
don't have enough waiters and waitresses.
The ports are virtually closed in China. I mean, how could companies be doing well?
What's the cost of doing business? The expense factor alone is, I mean, you have so many businesses whose margins are very thin, and you just increase that expense factor, and now you're lucky to break even.
But you see people being willing to spend exorbitant amounts of money
Yes.
But they're using
every single day.
Yep.
their
It's
credit cards to
amazing.
make that happen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That's the problem. Credit is growing at a massive rate right now.
but also,
And they're
some
buying
people
all
have a
the-
tremendous amount of money.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Look at the real estate market. But it's incredible.
It's still going
There's a
stupid.
second housing bubble coming. I mean,
It's coming, it's definitely coming, yeah,
The prices are
yeah.
there. And if you remember what happened in the last one, I mean, that was disastrous. I mean, it was just absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And to expand on Rick's point, like,
No inventory at all. Yep.
Well, you think about just the cost of housing right now is remaining up. It's gonna come down, but you couple that with the rising interest rates, and I forget, on an average price house, I just heard that it's another $700 a month for a 30-year fix, or for a 30-year mortgage. Yeah.
wow, it's gone from something like 2.5 or 3% up to just over 5%.
6.
6.
Yeah, but don't you remember
That's
when it
huge.
was like 12 and
Oh,
15%?
exactly, yeah,
I do
yeah.
remember that.
But the house
I was
prices
so
were
excited 'cause I could
half of what
assume
they
a
are.
mortgage at 12%.
So when the interest dropped, the prices went up because you're still paying that same number.
Variable.
Oh, yeah.
Variables what did it.
But, you know, it would seem that with all this going on, if non-believers know this is going on as well, so wouldn't it be the perfect in for discipling people? I mean,
Yeah.
that really,
Right.
you know, keep us on track,
But they don't
is
wanna
to
hear
talk
it.
to
That's
others.
the problem, a lot of them.
Yeah.
Last time I was up
Sure.
in Yukon at the parking garage, one of the guys that does the overnight there, was talking with for a few minutes, and about it, and then, you know, I kinda mentioned with church, kinda roundabout like things. He gave me the cross-eyed look, you're one of those crazy nuts, and walked away.
Yeah, you know something I was thinking about recently that I noticed,
We know you're
when you're
crazy,
talking
Tom.
to a
Not one
stranger,
of that.
and you wonder where they're at,
I'll be
Yes.
proud to be one of them.
religiously speaking,
Yes.
if you just mention church or God,
Yeah.
just kind of, not in, sort of in passing, but with regard to something that you're a believer or involved with,
Right.
and I don't mean stuff like Jesus saves or, anything like that, just God or church. Almost everyone will just gloss right over it and change the subject.
Yeah.
But if you were to say something, anything religious to a Christian, they wanna know more.
Thank you, Megan.
Yeah.
They wanna ask you, find out where your heart is at.
But
where
if
your
not-
head is at,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Right.
It's
I mean, there's a
amazing.
couple other things too. Like I seen a car with Hail Satan on the back of it, and where my truck is at the shop, my big blue truck dump, I
For
moved it
those
from
of
the
you
back
on
of the building.
YouTube, if we get together again, I'll let you know, but I'm gonna let you go for now. So, good to see you, and here, there, or in the air.